The Other Side of Fear, a Backpacker's Memoir by Jenni Reavis. Unhidden Heroines Series, Book Number 1. Chapter 14, My Lightbulb Moment. A few days later, I was scared to death walking into the first session with my new therapist. Why was I so scared? It was time to start looking at the foundation of what I had inside. I had no idea where to start. I knew that starting this path of healing was going to hurt. It was going to require opening up some deep chambers that had been closed for years. Some that had been closed nearly my whole life. When I looked inside, it was like a labyrinth mansion that belonged to a hoarder. And there was stuff packed in every room from the floor to the ceiling. It went so far back that I couldn't even see the depth of it. All I could do was start with what was right in front of me, one thing at a time. The trauma bombs that had been set off at different times of my life had left a colossal mess, and leaving it all there as it was had caused massive infections inside of me. These infections manifested in cycles of codependency, self-destructive binges of alcohol and food, unhealthy friendships, horrible sleep habits, and making poor life decisions that kept me unstable financially, emotionally, and physically. Living in a state of dysfunction, pain, chaos, and anger had become my new normal. And to create a new normal meant facing monsters and reopening wounds so that I could clean them out and let them heal properly. My belief systems would change. My reality on the outside of me would change. My relationships would shift, therefore shifting my sense of belonging within certain communities. I was scared because even though my way wasn't working, it was comfortable. I knew the scenery of the path I had been on for such a long time, and even though the chaos and pain were a miserable way to live, I at least knew what to expect from them. What was on the other side of a path of healing? That was completely foreign to me. But I was ready to go into the unknown. I was desperate for change. My life had become unbearable. I felt like I had nothing in common with anyone, that I was the only one who had gone through my traumas, and I was terrified about opening up about anything inside, because surely if my therapist knew how broken and how damaged I really was, then she would leave me too. The betrayal of my mom, having an affair with my boyfriend, and then being kidnapped and raped was my introduction into adulthood, with no foundation or knowledge of what being a happy, healthy adult really looked like. And then I had to find my own way through all the rubble in what seemed like a cold and cruel place. Once I was able to start opening up to my therapist, emotions started to come up like a tidal wave. It was common for me to go on drinking binges after therapy sessions because of the feelings that surfaced. It's easier to stay numb. When I came into her office with big open wounds on my elbows and knees, she took one look at me as I sat on her couch and started chuckling from a place of compassion. Those nasty wounds wouldn't have anything to do with the bottle of vodka that you may have found after our last intensive session, now would it? Yep, I had buried myself in a fifth as soon as I got home and had fallen outside in the driveway, tripping over my own feet when I tried to go talk to a neighbor's cat. It seemed like every time I got one chamber emptied out, it cleared the view to 3 more rooms stuffed full of more feelings to sort through. I felt hopeless at times, and I wanted to walk out and quit many times, but I was already too far in to quit. We built trust to the point that when it was time to dig into the kidnapping and the rape, we had 2-hour sessions at this point because an hour wasn't enough to get into the chamber and then get back out. She went with me back to that Saturday morning and relived every detail. I let her see and feel with me, and then one day she invited me to take part in a Monday night group therapy session with other women who had been through similar traumas. This was a game changer for me. This was the first time that I formed solidarity with other women who wanted to heal and thrive and then find their new life path. I learned that I was not the only one who had my fears and insecurities. I was sitting in a group of women who understood every step, but who had also had their own story to tell and honored and validated the uniqueness of mine. I learned in group therapy that I was not the only person who had experienced these things throughout life. Talking openly about such intimate things absolutely set off PTSD triggers, commencing with night terrors, flashbacks, panic attacks, triggering food, drug, and alcohol binges. But I shared those too. By learning from members of the group, I started finding ways to change those patterns a little bit at a time, and we found ways to help each other. I still had my private session once a week, but attended this Monday night group session for a few weeks. During our final session, we talked about fear, how our traumas changed our view of life by the fears that were instilled because of it, and how those fears held us back. We each took turns expressing our fears to the group, and were able to see how one's fear held that person back from living a truly fulfilled life, which in turn made me see how much my fears held my life back. My fears included fear of never feeling safe and secure, fear of coming out fully with my story and still not being enough, fear of never having consistent income, fear of being raped or assaulted again, fear of being hurt again in relationships, fear of getting to the other side of healing but nothing better being there for me, fear that I would be stuck in Oklahoma forever with a dead-end, boring job opportunity, fear that I wouldn't be loved or accepted unconditionally by anyone ever, and fear that I would never have a chance to change my ending. At the end of our session, the therapist gave each of us a framed quote that said, "Everything you want is on the other side of fear." George Adair. When I got home, I hung that frame by my light switch in my room so that I would see it every morning, every night, and dozens of times in between. It challenged me to connect with my intentions for everything I did. It challenged me to keep venturing into unknowns, even if that meant making one small change at a time, like taking a new path when going for a walk, having the courage to talk to someone new, or releasing control. Gosh, if a ship at sea changes its compass the tiniest degree, its destination is entirely different. The more I was growing and healing, the less I was okay with my current life and the contents of it. Sherry and I started growing apart. Her lifestyle was one embedded in the bar, and that was going to fall out of alignment with the direction I was going. To do so much work in therapy and then drink was as effective as doing an intense workout at the gym and then hitting the drive-thru for fast food. I also felt like I had less and less in common with friendships that revolved around the bar. I wanted to have real conversations about real shit, and that rarely happened in my friendships that were embedded in the bar scene. I graduated from UCO with my business degree in June of 2014, and Sherry and her friends threw me an unforgettable graduation party. I wasn't ashamed that a 4-year degree had taken me 10 years because I knew how many times, statistically, I should have been dead along the way. I spent the summer looking for jobs that required undergraduate degrees, thinking that some magic door for a better opportunity would open, but it didn't. The job interviews I got were for minimum wage paying, entry-level positions doing basic tasks. Work I would have been excruciatingly bored with. After having run my own operation for nearly 5 years, I had no motivation at all to say yes to a job like that, where I would make in 1 week what I could have made in 1 day running my business. To go from the freedom of self-employment to an office prison where I would be told when to take a piss, I just couldn't do it. I was venting about all of it to my friend Katie, who lived in Connecticut, and she said, "Why don't you come and stay here for a while? Stay on my couch. If you don't like it, you can stay. If you like it, you can stay, and we can figure out other housing arrangements. If you don't, you can leave, and you can say you tried, but at least you'll have a new experience. No bad could come out of it." She was right. I needed a break from everything, from my relationship with Sherry, from Oklahoma, from the bar scene and so much alcohol, and from my therapy. It was a huge step of courage to break out and make such a drastic change. But the framed quote next to my bed reminded me that it was okay to push myself outside of my comfort zone. Everything you want is on the other side of fear. I told Sherry that night that I was leaving for Connecticut. The next day, after shoving a couple of boxes in a suitcase in the backseat of my Jeep, I pulled out to start my 27-hour drive to Connecticut. It was nearly mid-October when I arrived there, and the scenery of the changing trees was stunning. The colors were so vibrant that I swore they had to be a painting or a calendar. Everything about Connecticut was beautiful. The way that they spoke English, the architecture of the homes, the structure of the neighborhoods and small towns, the narrow 2-lane highways that wound through the hills and were covered with color-changing leaves. Katie's best friend Erin lived close by, and she got me an entry-level position at the assembly plant where she was a floor manager. And that was the job that taught me how to build electronics. I've never done anything like it, but I discovered I loved it, and I was really good at it. It didn't pay very much, but it paid enough for me to be responsible for my part of things and have adventures, and it gave me challenges that were fulfilling. I experienced winter in the Northeast, and the first snowfall of the season was tall enough to bury my whole vehicle. I learned things did not close down for snow days like Oklahoma did. Katie brought me some of her military gear to bundle up in so that we could dig out my Jeep. Luckily for us, my Jeep was a four-wheel drive, so I could get us both around in snowy weather. A couple of months into my time there, Katie, her boyfriend, and I took a day trip to New York City, where we rode a train for the first time ever. I saw Times Square and Central Park, and then we went to eat pizza in Brooklyn. Then I took a road trip to Rhode Island. I remember driving down a long stretch of highway that was surrounded by stark blue ocean water as far as I could see on both sides. I've always been scared of the ocean, and driving across that vast body of water paralyzed me with fear. I had that steering wheel gripped with my sweaty hands, and I kept thinking about turning back, but I had nowhere to pull around. I had no choice but to feel all the feels until we made it to where I was going. It was the first time I ever saw a snowy beach, and the ocean around Rhode Island was the most stark blue of any water I had ever seen, and to this day it still is. It was time to go back to Oklahoma. I'd been gone for 4 months, and my time away had brought me so much insight about my life. I felt ready to go back to therapy, go back to Sherry and our relationship to see if the time apart would help us restore something new, and I wanted to be with Gracie. My trip alone, just driving 27 hours to get there, had given me back some power. If I could face those long stretches of highway over the ocean, ride trains, be independent again, dig my Jeep out of snow and face life a different way all on my own, I could keep facing it in Oklahoma. I was ready to step into a new chapter with new power and go to my next step of healing in my therapy sessions. I had only just begun, and as hard as it was to do the work, it felt amazing. The more work I did, the better I felt. Had I never just started somewhere desperate for a change, nothing would have ever changed, and I would have missed out on all of that.